On December 12th, 2019, there will be a general election in the UK. I cannot say that I am an expert in UK politics. In fact, I know very little. I've never been to the UK. I'm not somebody who is super well versed in the situation there, but I have a lot of friends who are. And I felt compelled to make this video based on the format introduced by my friend Curio. They did a video called 5 Stories from My Life and Labor Policies That Would Have Changed Them. Please go watch that video if you are in the UK, or just go watch it in general. Curio's channel is quite good. I'm obviously going to be focusing on the US because that's where I live. So I'm going to tell you 5 stories from my life and the labor policies that would have helped me. Now, these are going to be kind of heavy stories, as most stories regarding things that labor policies could help are. I will also say that these stories are just as much about my parents as they are about me. Transportation. I went to high school in Arlington, Texas, which is, if you don't know, dead center between Dallas and Fort Worth, and the greater DFW Metroplex is one of the most densely populated areas in the United States. Texas drivers are notoriously terrible, and traffic, especially in Arlington, it's always a nightmare because people commute. Almost nobody lives close to their job in Texas. If you have a job that pays well, chances are you are commuting upwards of 30 to 40 to 50 minutes to get to your job. Where I lived, I was a 25-minute drive away from my high school, which my mom had to drive for me. My mom and I lived alone in a house that she bought. She was a nurse, and we'll get into that a bit later, but she also commuted to her job. So she would drive me to school and then go to her work. Now, if you're asking why I didn't take the bus to school, it's because the bus didn't run to where I lived. So yeah, we had to drive. A lot of districts are underfunded, so it's hard. Sometimes people just don't have easy transportation to school on the bus network. And Arlington in general has no public transportation at all to speak of. I think that there's a college-run transit bus that's local, but nothing connected to the wider Arlington area or to the DFW Metroplex in general. Of course, the Arlington City Council always justified this by saying that they didn't want to bring the homeless population of Dallas and Fort Worth into Arlington, because of course this is the rich suburb of the DFW area. It's where Six Flags Over Texas is. It's where the Dallas Cowboy Stadium is. It's the entertainment center of the DFW, not a place where people live. It's a place where people visit and then leave. So living there was not great, pretty hostile. I didn't have a car. I don't have a car. I don't even have my driver's license. There are several reasons for this that I won't go into, but basically I don't trust myself behind the wheel of a car, and I don't think I should have to. I don't like the idea of my brain driving a several-ton metal cage around other people that I could hurt or kill accidentally, or who could hurt or kill me accidentally. I don't think anyone should drive. Part of it is that I've just never had the money to buy a car because they're obviously expensive things up front and you have to pay monthly insurance. And I've been on very, very low income most of my life. But another big reason is that I associate driving with Arlington, with the DFW area, with the traffic there. I remember being in the passenger seat of our Scion, of all cars, driving to school every morning in wall-to-wall traffic as the highway was under construction for a beautification project, and just how hectic, chaotic it was, how aggressive the drivers were, and the fact that my mom kept falling asleep at the wheel, which gets us to labor protections. I mentioned earlier that my mom was a nurse. She was a nurse for pretty much as long as I can remember. But she didn't work in hospitals as far as I know. As long as I can remember, she always worked in retirement homes. Towards the end, she was a hospice nurse, which meant that she took care of the sick elderly and presumably soon to die. And she was a home nurse, so she would go to people's homes and take care of them. And the company that she worked for, she basically babysat people for hours at a time for a shift of a full day, and then a new nurse would take her place and she would leave. By all accounts, she was very good at this job. I mean, she worked as a nurse for a very, very long time, and people still send me messages occasionally saying that the effect that she had on them because of her kind soul and her protective and giving nature. And she genuinely cared about these people. She took pictures with them, she talked about them, she shared her frustrations with and about them. And it was a job that she loved, and it was a job she was good at. Now, when I mentioned that she was falling asleep at the wheel, this is because she was having heart problems at the time. She smoked and drank a lot. She was a boomer, a party kid for sure in the 70s. Well, she was on a medication to help her with her heart. And one of the major side effects of this medication was that it made her extremely sleepy, bordering on narcoleptic. So when she would drive me to school in the mornings, I would often have to wake her up as we were going 40, 50 miles an hour on the highway. So I was terrified, sitting in the passenger seat of the car, going to school, just staring at my mom, watching her eyes drift away, waiting to have to grab the wheel or shake her awake. And that is like a permanent association in my head with driving that makes it hard for me to want to drive because of that tension that just stuck with me. Well, she went to work on this medication, and on one of her house calls that she was staying at this person's house, apparently she sat down and she fell asleep, and the nurse that was going to relieve her showed up at the end of her shift. My mom was still asleep. Woke her up, and my mom was fired pretty soon after that. Because obviously this is a bad thing, right? As a nurse, you shouldn't fall asleep on the job. That's a pretty bad thing to do. But there were extenuating circumstances. She was on a required medication that was prescribed to her, and the work schedule of a nurse is one that does not really give itself well to getting consistent sleep. And here is a woman who worked the majority of her life as a nurse, was good at it, had decades of experience, had glowing recommendations from so many different places. And she was fired for this one admittedly pretty bad thing that was entirely avoidable. And she never worked as a nurse again. She worked at a cell phone store until the day she died, which wasn't long after that. No one in any job should have to shoulder through something like that. Everybody should have the right to leave, to recover. My mom should not have been working while she was on that medication. She knew it, her company knew it, everybody around her knew it, but she had to because they would have fired her if she didn't. And then they fired her because she did. It was a no-win situation. And that brings us pretty handily to healthcare. Now, like I said, my mom had heart problems, and she could barely afford the medication she was on, and I'm pretty sure that she skipped out on a lot of it. Well, my mom worked at the cell phone store and came home and drank and did her usual routine until she died. She had a heart scare, went to the emergency room. I think she was getting a CT scan when she had an aortal dissection, which is essentially when one of the major vessels of your heart rips open, and she died instantly. Now, this was the result of years of substance abuse and her not taking care of herself, but it was also the result of her not being as diligent about her health care as she could have been, should have been, but she couldn't be. In part because her work schedule never gave her time to leave. When she was a nurse, she couldn't go to regular checkups. She had no time, barely had time to drive me to school in the morning. She was already working so much, so hard for her entire life, raising me by herself. If anybody deserved health care, deserved to be taken care of by the state, by us, by the taxpayers, is her. Housing. And I said that we owned a house. This was in 2007, I believe. And the financial crash happened, and we lost that house. For my mom, like for a lot of people, owning a house was the symbol of maturity. It was the thing that she'd been working towards most of her life. It's the thing her parents had. It was the thing that people criticized her for not having, in the same way people criticized me for not having a car. And it was such a big thing for her to finally have a house that she liked. And it was a pretty good house. And she got fired, and then our rates went up, and there was just no way for us to pay for anything. So we had to leave. We had to move out. I have no doubt in my mind that the stress and the disappointment of that situation was a huge contributing factor to her eventual death, because her desire to live up to an idea of what being an American is was weaponized and exploited by the state, by capital, to grind her into dirt. You get the things that you want, that you need, as long as you can pay for them. But if you can't pay for them, you have no right to them anymore, no matter how much work you've done in your life. Welfare. This last story is a slightly different tack, but it kind of brings everything together. I don't talk about my dad much because he wasn't a huge part of my life after a certain point. He worked at a construction job for a long time. He was a regional manager. Eventually, this company was going under, and he messed up a big job, so he was fired. After that, my dad moved to a small town in Ohio where he got work at a factory. He worked there for a really long time. He had an apartment that was smaller than the room that I'm in now, and he lived on his own. He walked to this factory every day because he got a DUI and lost his license and his car. So he walked to this factory every day, and this is a man who was, by that point, pushing 70. He would go to work, come home, smoke some cigarettes, watch some movies in his little apartment, drink Bud Light, and go to sleep. Eventually, he got fired from that job. I don't know why, but he moved in with one of his brothers, lived on his land in a little trailer. Of course, my dad had many of his own medical issues because also drank his whole life, smoked his whole life, probably did more than his fair share of drugs as well, and basically never went to the doctor. He's one of those types who said, nah, it's fine, I've got it. And one day in 2015, my uncle went out into the trailer and found my dad dead. When I think about his life and my mom's life, I think about the gargantuan web of interlocking issues that led to their early deaths. Because both of my dad and my mom were fired for fireable offenses that really weren't their fault, they were not eligible for welfare. For the same reason, they had no health care. Because my dad lived in this small town, he had no public transportation to get him anywhere. He couldn't get to the doctor even if he had health insurance. He had no union representation to keep him from being fired, to fight for him in these cases where these companies that don't give a shit about the people who actually do the work for them, that generate their income, when they decide that they can save a few pennies by getting rid of somebody. And all of these same things affect me, affect all of us. I have bounced back and forth between apartments and renting out houses with friends pretty much my entire life. I will never own a home. I will never know what it's like to stay in the same place. My income is based entirely on donations from people. And if the economy takes a downturn, if YouTube randomly decides to change some aspect of their algorithm, suddenly my revenue stream is gone, and there will be no safety net for me provided by the state. I'll probably struggle to find a job because I don't have a good resume. And even if I did something, how could I get there without public transportation? All of these stories have one thing in common, and that is the rampant, unchecked policies of private corporations stripping the common people of all of their protections, of all of their abilities to have agency over their own lives. The fact is, you do not fix any one of these problems without addressing the underlying system that caused them in the first place. The solution is not UBI or Uber or Airbnb. The solution is not more business, because of course the priority of business is to always make more money. Fundamentally, that is all that they ever care about. If they can scrape more pennies out of our skin, they will do so. We need and deserve Medicare for all. We need and deserve mass public transit. We need and deserve better welfare protections. We need and deserve stronger unions. And we need and deserve affordable housing. As elections approach, whether you're in the US or the UK, try to remember that politics is not a phantom. This is not about likability. This is not about what people tweet. This is about the policies that will save people's lives, that will save your life. In no uncertain terms, we are at the start of the most important political decade of our lifetimes. Whether you agree with the system of democracy or not, the fact is, one of the only ways that we have of affecting change is through voting. So register to vote, vote Labor, vote Democratic Socialist. Vote for the people who actually care about saving people. Everyone has their own version of these same stories, and I invite you to continue to tell your own in the same format and encourage others to do the same. We all deserve better, and we can get better. It isn't impossible. It only feels that way because the people in power have spent decades making sure that we feel helpless. But you are not helpless.